In a previous module, we looked at access point groups. Let's just review the process that access points go through when they join a custom access point group. First of all, we create the custom group, and then we define the settings that we want the group to have. Next, the access points join the group, and those settings are applied to each of the access points. We then looked at the model-specific settings that exist within a group, where we create specific settings to apply to specific models of access points. So all access points in the group of that model will have those settings applied, and those settings are applied on top of the group settings. One thing we haven't looked at yet though is the use of individual access point settings, where we configure a single access point with specific settings for that access point. There may be circumstances where this is something that you want to do, so let's look at that process now. Let's go back then to configure access points, and I'm going to choose one of the R510s that we added to the group in a previous module. Actions, well, I'm going to choose edit, so let's have a look at this individual AP settings. Okay, so we've got the MAC address at the top, we've got the device name and a description and a location, and we can put some GPS coordinates in for this specific individual access point. Do we need to do that? Well, consider this for a moment. If I cancel this and we go back up to our maps on the dashboard, we already have these access points located on a map. Here we go, the head office map. The access points located here. So we don't necessarily at this point need to change those individual settings. So let's go back to the access point. Moving on. We can see that the access point is a member of a group. This is the group that we added it to, and we can change its group membership here. The Bonjour gateway and Bonjour fencing is something that we'll look at later on. However, do note that the Bonjour gateway is a setting that can only be applied to an individual access point. It's not a setting that's done at the group level. And I'll explain more about that when we cover Bonjour in a later module. Moving further down, we can see the channel range settings and the radio settings are very similar to the settings that we had at the group level. If I continue down again, so we've got the radio 2.4, the radio 5. We have some network settings, IP mode, also configurable at the group level. Then we've got the access point individual IP details. Well, it's picked its IP up from DHCP, but we can change this into a manual setting here if we want. We've got both IP4 and IP6. And then we have some model-specific control. This will override any model-specific settings that come under the model-specific control of the group settings. The Hotspot 2.0 settings are to do with hotspot services, which are outside the scope of this course, and we won't cover that any further here. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that most of these settings are the same settings that you see when you configure access point groups. So the question is, if the setting is something that can be applied at the group level, is it a good idea to apply it to the individual access point? One thing that you must remember is that the settings are applied in order. First, the group settings, followed by the model-specific settings, and finally, the individual access point settings. The model-specific settings override the group settings, and the individual access point settings override the group and model-specific settings. So here's my advice. If you're changing settings that can only be set at the access point level, then it's a good idea to do it, of course, at the individual access point level. However, if the settings that you're changing can be made at a group level, then my personal recommendation is to create a custom access point group and just add a single access point into that group. This gives you a little bit more control. For example, if you move the access point from this group to another group, then its individual access point settings will no longer apply and it will inherit the group settings, and that's a good thing. It could be that you move the access point to another group and forget that you've specified some individual access point settings, and then things won't work the way that you want them to. Or it could be that the access point fails and you want to swap it out. Then again, the new access point will then inherit the new group settings and be ready to go. So it's something that you have to bear in mind and work out what's going to be best for your deployment. In short, if the settings that you want to make are only possible at the individual access point level, then of course that's where you need to do it.